Welcome to Citizens Forum. Today we're going to be talking to Elizabeth Woodward. Elizabeth is a member, a founder, I believe, of the 9/11 Consensus Panel, and she writes on social justice issues, publishing on global research, which I believe is a online uh,
Canadian.
Canadian site. She is the author of the popular handbook on nuclear weapons activism, What Can I Do? And for 25 years, she served as head librarian for the BC government. And she holds a BA from Queen's University and a library science degree from UBC. So today we're going to, we're nearing the 15th anniversary of the events of September 11th, 2001. And these events are still weighing very heavily in what's happening in the world today. And we're just going to be going over some of the things that happened on that day and what we should be thinking about in the future and how to handle this. So welcome, Elizabeth, to the show.
Thank you, Walter.
And in the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have a petition on which 2,619 architects and engineers have signed, demanding a new investigation into the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. Please tell us about what that is all about.
Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth was founded by an architect, Richard Gage, 5 or 6 years ago. And he heard what David Ray Griffin had written. David Ray Griffin is my colleague on the consensus panel. We co-founded it together. And Richard immediately recognized, after he looked at the way the buildings fell, that there was enough doubt about the official story, that the 9/11 investigation must be reopened and must include a full inquiry into the possible use of explosives, which might have been the actual cause of the destruction of the World Trade Center and Building 7. So over the past 6 or 7 years since he started, he's a very good organizer, and he has got 2,600 signatories from his community of architects and engineers who are calling for this new investigation.
That's very impressive that many experts in that area are asking questions. Now, I wonder if you could tell us about the 9/11 consensus points.
Well, the 9/11 consensus points come from the 9/11 consensus panel, which Dr. David Griffin and I co-founded in 2011, 5 years ago. And we have 23 members, and these people are most of them are academics, or they're engineers, or some of them are commercial airline pilots. We have some journalists, 2 lawyers. We have a psychologist. And we have gradually developed 48 points, consensus points, that refute the claims of the official story. And we use a medical best evidence model to develop these points. It's the Delphi method, and it's the same model that they use to develop consensus statements in medicine, which the whole world follows. So it's a very powerful methodology. And we've developed these points in 10 different categories. People mostly look at the towers, like that's 9/11 is the way the towers hit. And some people know about Building 7, but there are official claims across the board about the flights themselves, the Pentagon, the hijackers and their departures from the airports, phone calls from the planes. That's another big one. It's the official claims about the phone calls can be quite easily refuted. And the other thing that we've looked into very carefully with FOIA requests and so on is the activities of the political and military commands that day. And it's all on the website at consensus911.org. You can find everything I'm talking about. So our official purpose is to provide the world with a clear statement based on expert, independent opinion of some of the best evidence opposing the official narrative. And the goal is to provide, of the panel, is to provide a ready source of evidence-based research to any investigation that may be undertaken by the public, the media, academia, or any other investigative body or institution. So that whenever an examination or an inquest might be done into this, our evidence will be there. And it's 5 years of 23 people working on it, so they'll have a good leg
It sounds like it's very high quality and meticulously organized, and I think this is the correct approach. But why is it, do you think, the media is so obsessed with endlessly repeating an official story of the events of September 11th, particularly when there's so many questions about that official story? Why are they so obsessed with it?
Well, we don't really know. We can't know. There have been some indications that the media has been advised that this is a social security issue for, for the United States and Canada. There are inklings of that, but nobody will ever say that. So they've given all this time to terrorism, beginning with the mother event of 9/11, and we feel that the media should be held to account for its disproportionate coverage, because more than 10 times as many people who died on 9/11, which was 3,000, are killed on U.S. roads every year. Like, we have about 42,000 were killed that year. And there have been more than 500,000 road deaths since 2001. And so why has there been such upheaval over this one event that has dominated the news for 15 years when other things are much more dangerous to human health? And in 2016, at the 15th anniversary, the world is still captive to a questionable war on terror that every day takes priority in the news over the looming catastrophe of climate change, which is reckoned to kill between 250,000 and 400,000 people this year. So we're getting up exponentially into other threats to civilization. And here we are with the war on terror in the news every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's what leads us into the question about, what are the Middle East energy wars all about? And how does that fit into the climate change discussion?
That's a really good question, and that takes going back a little bit into history. But the Middle East wars have always been about oil, historically. If you even go back into the 1930s, there was a pipeline called the Iraq Petroleum Pipeline from the north of Iraq down to what is now Israel. So the West has been in there wanting to divert that oil to its own purposes. And the reason that they're there and not somewhere else is that Iran and Iraq have the 4th and 5th largest oil reserves in the world. Russia is 8th in lineup. You can check this on Wikipedia. And the United States is 11th. Canada's actually pretty high up. It's 3 or 4. If you think of the tar sands as a kind of legitimate source of...
And these are known reserves.
These are, known reserves. So, and even the United States has even admitted this, that former U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said of the Iraq War in 2007, people say we're not fighting for oil. Of course we are. They talk about America's national interest. What the hell do you think they're talking about? We're not there for figs. And Alan Greenspan, who was the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, he said the same year, 2007, I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows, that the Iraq War is largely about oil.
So it's you can almost thank the neocons for laying it out in plain language, because they're unabashed about it. But it seems that so many other politicians and so many other entities want to cloak it in something else, and I think this leads to this question: is there a hidden agenda behind this war on terror?
Absolutely, yes. Power in the world depends largely on access to energy. And depending on foreign oil is a really great handicap to a country like the United States that wants to be the leader in the world. So it wants to be dominant, and so they've cloaked this. The agenda is cloaked in the humanitarian. They're rushing over there to the rescue of all these suffering people because of these terror wars in the Middle East and Libya. And Libya is 9th in the world in oil reserves. So it's no accident that in 2011 the United States was in there trying to save the Libyans.
Democratizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they did a great job at that.
It's totally ruined now. All these countries have been ruined. And so 9/11 conveniently produced U.S. public consensus to create regime change in these countries with the most oil because of, while demonizing them.
So I wonder if you could tell us about the new film Decade of Deception.
Oh, that's the film that it's a condensed version of the Toronto hearings, which were held at Ryerson University in 2011, September 2011. I was there, and most of the real experts on 9/11, the real researchers, like Dr. Griffin and Graham McQueen and Kevin Ryan, and you can see at the torontohearings.org website who these people are.
Yeah.
And they produced a lot of really high quality evidence, and it's been put up on YouTube. So the official claims about 9/11 were revealed in this film to be transparently false deceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're looking at really, it's like a crime. This is a crime scene. We're looking at the evidence the best we can. Those that look at this evidence seem to be, declared as being some, muckrakers or conspiracy theorists. But you're just looking at this evidence in as methodical way as possible to try to get to the bottom of it. And it seems that the fossil fuel industry is really embroiled into this issue in ways that we should really try to find out. And basically, how do you feel the fossil fuel industry has promoted, say, the climate change deniers?
Oh, it's been well proven now. It's out, and finally this year it's out in the open.
Yeah.
But first you need to understand that about 98% of published climate scientists have believed for a long time, since the 80s, that global warming is caused by human beings through their vast worldwide fossil fuel emissions. And this is dangerous for the oil companies.
Yeah.
So to promote skepticism, there was an article in The Guardian in February 2013, and they showed that conservative billionaires had funneled $120 million of secret dark money, they called it dark money, in the years from 2002 to 2010 to 102 Republican think tanks. And the idea was to convince the public that climate change is natural, that these are natural fluctuations in temperature, and that the planet was hotter 500 years ago. And they brought forth all kinds of little bits of information here and there that aren't sort of broadly based like the science is. So the climate denial funds from oil sources included in this article, included three Washington-based entities. One was the Donors Trust, two was the Koch Foundation, and three was ExxonMobil. And now, it just turned out that ExxonMobil's scientists knew back in 1988. They knew, the same as the climate scientists that were publishing, that climate change was real. And this has caused a 25-year delay in addressing climate change, because the denial in the media has made it possible for everybody to say, well, maybe it's not happening. So we don't really have to get serious.
Yeah.
So right now, there are attorneys general from 16 Democratic states in the United States are suing Exxon for deliberately misleading the public in a criminal way against knowing what's going on with the climate.
That's very important.
And they're called Attorney Generals United for Clean Power. You can Google it.
So, I mean, that really does kind of bust that story wide open.
Yeah.
Now, how do
Yeah.
you feel that the those that are denying the scientific facts behind 9/11 and those that are denying the facts about climate change, how do they go hand in hand?
It's kind of difficult to prove. It just, all we know is that they come from the same source.
Yeah,
The effect of this denial funding has had a stunning impact on media reports, and we have a slide about that. That climate contrarians, they've persuaded people, a lot of people, especially people who think that God would never, God is in charge of climate, not humans. Like a lot of fundamentalists in the United States think God would never allow humans to destroy the planet. So, and God wouldn't destroy the planet. So therefore, so these contrarians that are being paid to warp the media have persuaded these people that CO2 is good. And there's and even now in the upcoming U.S. election, it's an issue that's very divisive. It's not settled in people's minds because they haven't got the
it
science.
seems that the Republicans aren't allowed to say climate change or something. It's just a taboo subject.
Virtually, it seems to be.
Now, maybe you could tell us how big, really, how large is the fossil fuel industry in real terms, in economic terms?
I'll go into that as soon as I just finish
Yeah.
this last point, that climate science denial supports the transparent lies of 9/11. I mean, they're both telling the same kind of denial, and 9/11 are telling the same kinds of lies.
Yeah.
So, and they allow the heavily subsidized fossil fuel industry to continue to seek oil in the Middle East. Like that's the underlying
Right.
agenda. Then how big is the fossil fuel industry? That's a really good question. By revenue, it is by far the biggest industry in the world. If you look at the Fortune 500 global list, the top 10, 50% of the top 10 companies by revenue are petroleum companies. And they occupy positions 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. Walmart's number 1, in case you're wondering. And 2 automotive industries, Toyota and Volkswagen, are they're in positions
So their interests would
6
be
and
very
7.
closely aligned also because they
Because
use fossil fuels.
that's exactly right, Walter.
Yeah.
So that's 7 out of the 10 are totally closely related by revenue. So the banks actually don't kick in until after number 20, surprisingly enough.
So it really is astonishing how powerful they are just based upon their economic abilities. And it's obvious that it'd be easy for them to manipulate corporate media, corporate owned media, just because they own a lot of it themselves. So it's
Exactly.
not hard, it's not a big stretch to see how their bias could occur.
Yeah.
How has fighting terrorism overrode climate change issues?
Well, the corporate media now spends an enormously disproportionate amount of time on sensational terrorist events all around the world, as we see every day. This is propaganda because it's disproportionate. I mean, what do you emphasize in the news? And its focus is on Muslim extremism.
Yeah.
So it increasingly points to a clash of civilizations, causing a public perception that terrorism is the thing most likely to be feared. As a result, the looming existential threat of climate change does not appear in the top 10 most talked about issues on Facebook and Twitter and other social media, because the media is focusing on terrorism, and it's, I think, 40% of social media are focused on terrorism and 0% on climate change. It should be the other way around. So the deceptions of 9/11 and climate denial continue to take priority over the disappearance of glaciers. Like in Asia, the glaciers around Mount Everest up that way, they provide all the drinking water for Asia. They're gone. They're gone. There are Indian farmers committing suicide. They can't water their crops. The Great Barrier Reef, which is home to so many varieties of seafood and fish, it's melting away with the carbonic acid. These deceptions are taking priority over these disappearances of our sustaining world.
Right.
And they originate from the same source, power and profits, from energy and military dominance.
That's right. I mean, the position could be easily taken that this is a real event,
Yeah.
and instead we're being fed a lot of phony information about terrorism, and you know, there can be an argument made that in many cases the terrorist threat really is not real and not as large as they claim.
It's proportionately very small in
Yeah.
terms of human death
Yeah.
worldwide. Yeah.
So, how important is it that the truth about 9/11 be understood by the world?
It's vitally important. It's almost the sort of first building block that needs to be removed from all the deception that's going on right now. If the truth about 9/11 were known, it would change the whole relationship between the West and the Middle East. The ongoing military occupations would have to cease. Huge apologies would be due to Iraq and Afghanistan, Libya, and reparations. Enormous reparations would be in order. The clash of civilizations that has been developing as a theme would become a recognized tragedy. All the people, Muslims in North America, are subject to all kinds of discrimination, and since 9/11, people are people all over the world. Evil is not the exclusive province of one culture or race, and I really believe that widespread recognition of the falsity of both 9/11 and climate change are central to the future welfare of civilization itself.
Right. You attended the COP21 Global Climate Summit in Paris in December of 2015. What was the political civic significance of what was covered in the global media about that event?
Oh, that's a really good question, Walter. While I was there, this was the biggest meeting in France since 1948. There were 40,000 people there from all over the world trying to come to an agreement on how the world would address climate change. And I went to look at the media. I'm always interested in media, and there were probably a whole acre of media there from all over the world. It was amazing. Like, all the top media were there. But when I would text home or email home to find out what was going on, what was being covered in the United States, this meeting went on for 2 solid weeks in Paris, and all I heard was that Donald Trump's outrageous statements were being covered in the media almost nonstop, and if there were any pauses over that, it was the San Bernardino shootings in California. And right before the climate summit, which started in late November, it was the shootings in the Paris nightclub. So global humanity is over there in France, Paris, and 195 countries are all trying to come to an agreement. And they wanted to get to an agreement where they would have only 1.5 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial temperatures, which is a very strong agreement.
1.5 degree increase. Yeah.
That's right. So here's global humanity, and the UN has been working on this climate summit for 5 years. It took place in an enormous venue, which took about 20 minutes to walk down one side of it, and we're just doing our darndest to come to an agreement. And meanwhile, in North America, because it's about fossil fuels, and the media is talking, trying to make Donald Trump into the terror event, and so I thought that was immensely significant that such an enormous conference would not be properly covered.
You know, and I watched, I was watching the media, and the coverage of the so-called terrorist events that happened just a few weeks previously. It was intense coverage, and the climate talks were covered of sort, but it was almost an aside that the main event was still this terrorism. Now, I wonder, is it fair to wonder, are the people that are orchestrating these terrorist events, is it a possibility that in fact they are working for the interests of the oil industry? Or is that too much of a stretch?
There are people making that case.
Yeah.
It's kind of an outrageous thing to suggest that governments or vested interests would actually stage things like 9/11 or like the
Yeah.
Paris nightclub and the Nice event lately with the truck driver, and they always seem to find out after investigating a while that these people are Muslim extremists. It's a stretch, but at the same time, if you go onto YouTube, you can see that people are investigating, they're looking closely at the footage, they're finding anomalies, and I don't think anybody has done a really good documented study comparing all of these events, and I think it would be worth doing to find out if these hints of darker, deeper forces might be true.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
My
Wood,
pleasure, Walter.
for coming in today. Very informative. It's wonderful to talk to you, and it's opened up a whole bunch of questions for people to start asking, and I think we have to stay on this case and continue asking those questions. So that concludes this segment of Citizens Forum.